All right, Rabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Shmuley Eli Wadinovitz, for dedicating all the Shur and Drushos this month in memory of Shmuley's father, Harav Peres Avram Ben Binyamin Moshe Zichron Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Ira and Miriam Grossman, in loving memory of Miriam's father, Aryeh Ben Moshe. Our Daf Yomi sponsors, Alan Wiseman, in memory of his mother-in-law, Mildred Newman, Malka Bas Usher, Zichron Livracha, and a beautiful anonymous sponsorship today. Anonymous, in honor of my father, who spends the majority of his day learning Torah and learning the Daf. I feel like a sponsorship like that shouldn't be anonymous. I would urge whoever this doting child is to identify yourself and to make sure your father knows that you're dedicating the Torah, dedicating the Shir in honor of his Hasmada. Truly, truly beautiful. Also with that, let us begin. So, Shechianu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh, we are Zochem Yeras Hashem, to begin the last half of Meseches Yevamos. We'll talk more about the accomplishment later, but right now let's learn a little bit. So today's daf is Kuf Chav Beis 122. We are picking up in Yeras Hashem at the Mishnah on Kuf Chav Aleph Amud Beis 121b. So Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today. Says the Mishnah, Afilu Shama min Hanashim Omros Meis Ish Ploni Dayo. So remember again, we've obviously been steeped in the sugya of what constitutes proper testimony in order to go ahead and ascertain that a man is dead. So now the Mishnah says as follows: even if you just hear women talking, in other words, the example of women talking is you just hear people conversing plainly, not discussing anything per se of halachic importance, just talking. So afilu shama min hatinokos, afilu shama min hanoshim omros meisish ploni dayo. Even if you just hear women talking and you hear them say, "Oh, Ruvain's dead," just in way of conversation, that's enough to accept as testimony and to allow for Rachel, Ruvain's wife, to be married. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you hear children say the following, Omrim hare anu holchin lispod velikbar es ish ploni. So ultimately, Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you hear children talking and you hear children saying, we're going to a levaya, right? We're heading to a levaya, we're going to a funeral, the funeral of so and so. Even if that happens, halacha l'maisa, again, that's enough edus that Reuven is dead. So then the Gemara Mishnah adds in another caveat. Bein shu miskavin, bein she'enu miskavin. So I'll say this is very interesting. In general, when someone gives edus that Reuven is dead, the edus is accepted whether he has kavana to give edus or doesn't have kavana to give edus. Now we'll see exactly what those terms mean in the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says it depends. B'Yisrael af b'shu miskavin. With a Jew, if a Jew is giving the edus, so whether he has intention to give testimony or doesn't have intention to give testimony, he's believed. When it comes to a non-Jew, im hayem miskavein ein eduso edus. When it comes to a non-Jew, if his kavana was to give edus, then he is not believed. Okay, we'll define those terms in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, V'domalo Ozli. So we'll say, now listen to this. One of the things that the Mishnah said that you could believe is like this. If you hear children talking, right, and the children are saying, let's go to the levaya of, so we're going to the levaya of so-and-so. So the Gemara says, how can you believe that as testimony? They're kids. Maybe they didn't end up going. They told me what they're going to do. Right, we'll say, by the way, what a profound Gemara. Because what makes children children? Children talk about what they're going to do and don't do it. The problem is that sometimes we become adults who talk about what we're going to do and we don't do it. The goal in life is to grow up. And if you're going to talk about doing something, have a plan, have a goal, have an aspiration, make sure to execute. So the Gemara says, maybe the kids are talking about going to the levaya, but they didn't really go. To which the Gemara says, no, you hear them say, we're coming back from the levaya. We're coming back from the levaya of going out and eulogizing and burying so-and-so. Maybe they went to the levaya of a grasshopper. In other words, sometimes kids stage these levayas for their pets or for these animals, right? For something. So maybe they're coming back from a pet levaya, and they called the pet Ruvain, right? But lamaisa, so they're saying they're coming back from Ruvain's levaya, but they really mean the levaya of their grasshopper. To which the Gemara says, "The ka'amri kein v'chein rabbanon havu hasam, v'chein sabdani havu hasam," where they give details about the levaya. These rabbanim were at the levaya. These were the people who eulogized that levaya. So with that level of detail, that level of specificity, ultimately, again, we accept their statement, the statement of the children, as eidos, or I should say, as called as eidos, that Reuven has in fact died. Pretty incredible. So remember again, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda went ahead and made an interesting distinction. A distinction between a Yisrael and a non-Jew. If a Jew gives eidos, that Reuven is dead. Whether he had in mind to give eidos or didn't have in mind to give eidos, he's believed. A non-Jew, if he had in mind to give eidos, he's not believed. If he didn't have in mind to give eidos, he is believed. Now, I will say, we still don't know what those terms mean. Having in mind to give eidos, not having in mind to give eidos, what's going on over here? So it says, let's analyze. It says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Lo shanu ela sheniskavin lahatir, aval niskavin laha'id eiduso eidos. So it says Shmuel, when do we say that an Oved Kochavim is not believed? When he had kavana to permit Rachel, the wife of Reuven. So if the intention of his eidos is to permit Rachel to remarry, that's when the Oved Kochavim is not believed. But if the Oved Kochavim is just giving eidos, he is believed. Says Gemara, how do you know? How do you know when it's, because it sounds like would be such overlap. Eidos to permit a woman to remarry, eidos that a guy is dead, isn't that really one and the same? Rabbi Yosef, listen to this. Bala Bezin va'amar. If a man shows up in Beis Din and he says, Ish ploni me'es, hisiu es ishto. So we'll say, if the Akum shows up in Beis Din and he says, listen, Reuven died, his wife Rachel is permitted to remarry. Zehu niskavin lahatir. So we'll say, that is an eidos that is designed to allow Rachel to remarry. So we'll say, that's a case where if an Oved Kochavim gives that type of testimony, we're not going to believe him. Others will say, if the Akum is showing up and it feels like the express purpose of his eidos is to permit Rachel to remarry, we're not going to believe the Akum in that circumstance. However, the Gemara says, Stam Zaun is Kamleilis. But if he just shows up in Beis Din and he doesn't make any mention of Rachel, and he just says, Reuven's dead, that's ultimately, again, the situation where you can believe the Akum. Now I will say, I'll point out, Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah also says that when it comes to the eidos of a Yisrael, whether the Yisrael had in mind to give eidos or to be matir Rachel, we believe him in both situations. It's only by an akum, only by a non-Jew. If he shows up just to give eidos, he's just stating the fact that Reuven died, we're going to believe him. Reuven died and Rachel should be able to get remarried. If he's coming in and giving that type of testimony, we are not going to believe him. Itmar nami, Amrei Shlakish, Lo shran el sheniskavin lahatir. We believe in Akum, we don't believe in Akum when he's coming to permit the wife to remarry. Aval niskavin laha'id, but ultimately, again, if he's just showing up with the kavanah to give eidos, eidos, ultimately, again, we believe him. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, lokach haya maisa, ba'oshia berebi, shehisris im shmoni mechamisha zakenim. I will say that there was a story of Oshia, the son of Rebbe, who went ahead and fought with 85 other Talmidei Chachamim. Amr lahem, lo shanu ela sheniskavin lahatir, aval niskavin laha'id, edusa edos. And Oshia Rebbe said, he wanted to make this distinction, that halacha l'maisa, when the Akum is just coming to give regular edos, just coming to say Reuven's dead, we could believe him. But when he's coming to go ahead and say Reuven's dead and you should allow Rachel to get remarried, that's when we won't believe him. So Oshia was trying to make this point, and what happened? The Chum did not agree to this distinction. Ella maslisin diktani uba ovid kochavim mahayim iskavin eino dusa eidos heichim mishkachas. So I will say, so if that's the case, so it appears that the majority of the rabbinic scholars rejected this distinction. If so, what is the distinction in the Mishnah? The Mishnah is making a distinction between two different types of eidos, of testimony, given over by the akum. One case he's believed, one case he's not believed. So the truth is, I understand the case of not believed, right? What's the case of not believed? When akum shows up and clearly is giving eidos to be matir Rachel to remarry, in that case we're not going to believe him, right? We're not going to believe him. So what's the case where he is believed? To which the Gemara says, wow. So I will say, ultimately, when is he going to be believed? In this case of Masiach Lefi Tumo. I will say, Masiach Lefi Tumo means when a person freely offers information of his own volition. Right? I will say, this is the case where Halacha L'Maisa, again, so Akum walks into Beis Din without being prompted, without being asked, and just shares information. That's the case where the Akum is going to be believed. The Gemara tells a couple of stories. Ki hahu dehava amar va'azil, man ika bechivoi, shachav chivoi. Like one time there was an Akum who came forward and he said, is there anyone here from the family of Chivoi? Anyone here from the family of Chivoi? For Chivoi has died. So I will say that's a case of Masiach Lefi Tumo. He's just sharing information. And based on this, Rabbi Yosef allowed Chivoi's wife to go ahead and remarry. So Gemara tells another story. So we'll say, this seems to be the halachic distinction that the Gemara goes ahead and accepts. A Jew, when he shows up in Beis Din, whether he shows up and says, Reuven is dead, or he shows up and he says, Reuven is dead, and what? Reuven is dead, and Rachel should be able to get remarried. Ultimately, Akum is going to be, Jew is going to be believed. Akum, if he shows up and he says, Reuven is dead, Rachel should get remarried, we don't believe him. If he's what's called Masiach Lefi Tumo, he just freely offers information, in that circumstance, we absolutely can believe him. To which the Gemara says, Hahuda hava ka'amar, Hahuda hava ka'amar va'azil, va'ilele parsha, zriza, dehava b'pumpadisa, deshachiv. So I'll say there was a guy who came along and he said, right, he was giving information. Look at Rashi, Parsha Zriza, Gibor Chayil v'Yisrael Haya. So I will say, ultimately, again, there was a non-Jew who showed up and started lamenting the death of this guy, Parsha Zriza. Rashi says over here, he was a valiant warrior. A Jewish guy. Parsha Zriza, the Shachiv. So again, guy shows up, says that this Jew died. Again, Masiach Lefi Tumo, giving information of his own volition as a result. Va'ansbar Yosef, right? Avitim Rava L'Dvisu, and either some say it was Rav Yosef or Rava allowed Parsha Zeriza's wife to remarry based on this testimony. Hahu dahava ka'amar va'azil man ika beichasa. There was a guy who showed up and said, "Is there anyone here from the house, from the family of Chasa?" Because what happened? Tava Chasa drowned. Akum shows up, Chasa drowned. Rav Nachman Elokim, Achlu Kavri Lechasa. So Rav Nachman cried out and he says, by God, the fish have eaten Chasa. And Midiburid Rav Nachman, Azla Devisu de Chasa ve'insaba, v'lo amrlo v'lo midi. And based on the words of Rav Nachman, so Chasa's wife went and remarried, and no one said anything to her. In other words, they accepted her ability to remarry based on the confluence of events. So I will say, first of all, you see from here something very important. We actually mentioned this in yesterday's daf as well, but it's important to circle back on it. Had Amra Banan, Mayim She'ein Lahem Sof Ishta Asura. So I will say, here's what's interesting. Remember again in yesterday's daf, we made a distinction between Mayim She'yesh Lahem Sof, Mayim She'ein Lahem Sof. Right? Mayim She'yesh Lahem Sof, water with defined, and visible banks. So the halacha is a woman is permitted to remarry if we don't see the even without finding a body, because we know again that halacha l'maisa what if the husband were to come to shore, then what we would have seen it. Versus mayim she'ein lahem sof, water without visible defined boundaries, the wife remains asura without a body, right? What's the reason? Because ultimately we're concerned that maybe he came up somewhere else, but we just didn't see him. The Gemara says something very interesting. You see from here, that which we said, Chazal said, the Mayim she'ein lahem sof, the wife is asura, hani mini lechatchila. That's only true lechatchila. Aval inosiv, but I will say, if she were to marry in that situation, lo mafkinon la mina. So I will say, very interesting halacha. In the case of Mayim she'ein lahem sof, really Chazal said lechatchila she should not remarry until they have definitive proof that he's dead. But if she did marry, we would not make her leave her second husband. Rabbi say, and that seems to be proven from this story over here, where this woman got remarried, and apparently this guy Chasa was lost in Mayim She'ein Lahem Sof. Incredible. Ika da'armi, Ansaba Rav Nachman Ledvisu. Others, there was an alternate version of this story, is that Rav Nachman allowed Chasa's wife to get remarried. Why? Amr Chasa Gavra Rabba Isay. Right? In Isa the Salik Kala Islay Lamilsa. Because Rav Nachman's like this. Chasa was a famous guy. If he would have come out of the water, people would have been speaking about it. The fact that no one's speaking about it indicates to us what? That he's dead. To which the Gemara says, we spoke about this yesterday, about Sevelohi. The Gemara rejects this distinction. Loshna Gavra Rabba, Loshna Lav Gavra Rabba, the Evedin Lechatchila. Or both say, Halacha L'maisa, we reject this idea about if a person is famous, a person is not famous, we reject that. I will say the halacha is, and this is kind of the closure of this sugya, Mayim She'ein Lahem Sof, the wife remains prohibited to remarry until they find the body. Mayim Sheyesh Lahem Sof, ultimately again, even without a body, the woman could go ahead and remarry. But even Mayim She'ein Lahem Sof, Rabbosai, what's the halacha? If the woman, so the chatchila, she shouldn't remarry. But the evidence, if she did remarry, we would not make her leave husband number 2. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. Hahu ovid kocham da havika amar leili Yisrael katol aspasta v'shadi lechivai b'shabsa v'ilo katlina lecha ki de katlina leploni bar Yisrael. The army lay bashal likadera b'shabes v'lo bashalei. So what's v'katlase? But say what's the case? There was an akum, a non-Jew came over to a Jew on Shabbos. And he said, here's the deal. Cut down grain for my animal right now. I'll feed my animal. And if you don't do it, I'm going to kill you like I killed your friend Ruvain. Because I asked Ruvain to cook me food on Shabbos, and Ruvain didn't do so. So I will say, what's going on over here? Why is this very important for us? Because I will say, what do we want to figure out? If based on what the Akum just said, that we could what? Say that Ruvain is dead. Right, the Akum is threatening a Jew now. B'mechalal Shabbos, cut down grain for me, right? Because you're not allowed to cut down grain on Shabbos. So you can't pick anything attached to the ground on Shabbos. So go ahead, cut down my grain. If you don't do it, I'm going to kill you like I killed Ruvain. Because I told Ruvain, cook me an omelet, make me an omelet on Shabbos. He didn't do it, and so I killed him. So Rabbi say, so is this enough edus to say that Ruvain is dead? And the case came before Abaye, right? So I'm sorry. Shama devisu. So Ruvain's wife heard about this. And she came before Abaye. Rebbe, am I allowed to remarry based on this testimony? To which the Gemara says, Shahisa, top of Kuf Chav Beis, Tlasa Wrigley. So I will say, so this is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So Abaye did not immediately answer her. Instead, literally, I will say, Abaye waited. The lashon over here is Tlasa Wrigley, which literally means like 3 regalim. What does this mean? I will say, this is an incredible Rashi. Take a look at top Rashi. Tlasa Wrigley. Shel Tamidi Chachamim Nikbatzim Lishma Drasha Hilchos Pesach BePesach V'Haisa Sho'eles Mehem. So I will say, so Pasha Pshat Rashi says is Abaye waited until one of the regalim. He says over here Pesach, everyone used to get together for the Achal. We'll say this is post Beis HaMikdash. So, but still on the regalim, the Talmidei Chachamim used to get together to learn. So I will say, Abaye said, you know what, let me wait till Pesach. I'll ask the Shaila to the Chevra on Pesach and we'll go over it. I will say, watch this. Ubitshuvas HaGeonim. That's the Pasha Pshat in Rashi. So regal means Pesach. Tshuvas HaGeonim Matzasi. Kol Hanach Rigli Da'amorai. Hanu Yom Shemes Bo Adam Gadol. Kovim Osa Lichvodo. Umide Shana B'Shana Kishamagia Osa Yom. Miskaptzim Tamidei Chachamim Mikol Sevivav. Ubaim Al Kivro. Im Shara Am Lahoshiv Yeshiva Sham. They both say, watch this. Rashi calls the Tshuvas HaGeonim. And the Tshuvas HaGeonim says, what's Tlasa Wrigley? It's a yard site. Whenever there was a yard site of a great Talmid Chacham, what would happen? His colleagues, Talmidei Chachamim, would gather at his kever, and they would set up the yeshiva that day, would learn at the kever, and the regular populace would come. I will say an incredible idea. So here you see, by the way, a raya to the notion of marking a yard site in a significant way, And interestingly enough, marking the yard site, interestingly enough, where? Right, at the kever. At the kever. There's a lot of halachic response about this as well. I'll say, but in any event, so Abaye says, let me get the kever together, whether it's Pesach, whether it's the yard site. Now, again, according to this approach, we don't know whose yard site it was, but it was someone's yard site, and therefore all the Talmidei Chacham were going to be together. Both side, top of Kuf Chaf Beis, second line. Amar Ravad Bar Ava, Zila Kamei Rav Yosef, Dechariv Sakina. Go to Rav Yosef, ask Rav Yosef the Shaila, because Rav Yosef is as sharp as a knife. So Azla Kamei, so right, Sabai comes to Rav Yosef, so what do we say in this case? Is the Ovid Kochavim statement that he killed Ruvain enough of an edus to allow Rachel, Ruvain's wife, to remarry? So Rav Yosef says like this: Pashat Mehamas Nisin. You can learn it out from the following Mishnah. Let's listen to this. Listen to this. You have a Gentile selling fruit in the marketplace. Va'omer Peros halalu shel arla. I have the best arla fruit. Now both say, understand, right? You say, oh wow, arla fruit? Yeah, it sounds great. There's only one problem, which is it's aser, right? You're not allowed to eat arla fruit. Arla fruit is of the first 3 years, right? Or right, hari halo shel arla, or hein shel azika. So I both say, ultimately, again, Rashi has two different versions. Azika over here could mean like fruit from a city, from a particular city that was known to have good fruit. Or ultimately, again, there's a second version of Rashi in Rashi Lo Amar Klom, where ultimately Rashi's Azika means he's selling fruits he's in Chutz La'aretz, and he's claiming that he's selling fruits of Eretz Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz. Then I will say, that sounds all fine and dandy. There's only one problem. When you have fruits of Chutz La'aretz, when you have fruits of Eretz Yisrael, what's the halacha? Trumas and Maisrus. So I will say, so essentially, let's go like this. He's claiming, I'm selling, great news guys, Jews, I'm selling arla fruit, or I'm selling fruit from Eretz Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz, which you have to assume is what? Or are what? Untithed. That's right? Or Hein shall nata revai. So I will say shall nata revayin. Or their 4th year produce. Remember, going to with 4th year produce. 4th year produce has to be eaten in Yerushalayim like Ma'aser Sheni. So I will say, so here's the shaila. I just want to buy some fruit, right? The Akum is claiming all of these things. It's Arla fruit. It's Eretz Yisrael fruit. It's nata revai fruit. Rav Yosef says, Lo Amar Klum. You don't have to listen to his words at all. Why? Lo niskaven ela lahashpiach mekcho. Because I will say, why is he throwing around these terms like arla, azeka, right? Not the ravai. Why is he throwing it around? Because it sounds frum. And everyone knows Jews like to buy stuff that sounds frum, right? That's like the package of candy with the 17 hashkachas. I only needed one. But Lamais against so the Mishnah says like this. The Mishnah says that halacha l'maisa, you don't have to listen to the guy, because often what the guy will do is say whatever he has to say to make the sale. So Rabbi Yosef says, based on this, going back to our previous case, when the Akum comes over to the Jew, we'll call him Shimon, and says, Shimon, cut down the grain right now on Shabbos, or I'm going to kill you like I killed Ruvain, who didn't make me my omelet last Shabbos. Rabbi Yosef says, we don't take that into account. We assume it's a bluff, right? We assume he's not telling the truth. He's just trying to go ahead and frighten Shimon to do what he wants Shimon to do. Incredible. There was a story of Yisrael and an Akum who were walking together on the road. So both say, we'll call it this. Akum and Ruvain were traveling. And what happens? The Akum comes back, and the Akum says, poor Ruvain, Shemeis baderech ukvartiv. He died, and I buried him on the road. V'yasiu ishto. And I will say, based on this, we allowed Ruvain's wife to get remarried. Again, I will say, why? Because what is this a case of? This is Masiach Lefi Tumo, where the Akum is offering information of his own volition, right? In other words, we're not asking him, we're not prompting him, he's just simply giving his own information. V'shuv ma'aseh b'kol shel bnei Adam, sheyem mahalchin la'Antochia. I will say there was a group of people who were walking to Antochia, Uba'o v'kochavim, v'amar, chaval al kolar shel bnei Adam shemesu ukvartim. And once again, an Akum came along and said, whoa, so sad, that group of people traveling to Antochia, they all died, and I buried them. V'yasiu es neshosem. I will say once again, we accepted the eidos of the Akum, and ultimately again allowed their wives to remarry. Shuv Maisa, B'shishim b'nei Adam, Shaymahalchin lekarkum beitar. I will say there was a group of people who ultimately again were traveling to the city of Beitar. Now, both say Karkum Beitar means to the siege of Beitar. Rashi says Kishaba Beitar b'matzar. Both say when was Beitar in a state of siege? Remember again, this is about Kochva rebellion, right? This is the fall. This was the last stand of the Jews against the Romans. So there was a group of Jews, for some reason, traveling toward the siege of Beitar. And an Jew came along and said, so tragic, that group of 60 Jews who were traveling towards the siege of Beitar, and ultimately they died. They died, and I buried them, and ultimately, based on this, we allowed their wives to remarry. So Rabbi say, you see this halacha again, that we even accept the testimony of a non-Jew when it is masiach lefi tumo, when he gives it of his own volition. Rabbi say, obviously, just to be very clear, this type of edus is far from ideal. But Rabbi say, the problem we're contending with is what? The alternative is aguna. So again, when faced with compromised edus or aguna, ultimately, I will say, assuming that we're operating how? That we're shifting the onus of this testimony to who? Remember, it's upon the woman now to make sure that if she's going to remarry, she's remarrying with good intel. That's what we have. That's what we're assuming is going to happen over here. Says the Mishnah Rabbosai, Mi'idin la'araner. So some other interesting discussions. Rabbosai, when identifying a body, you could identify the body by candlelight, v'la or lavana, or by moonlight, u'masina pi baskal. You could allow a woman to remarry based on a baskal. Now we're going to have to see exactly what that means. Rashi says over here, doesn't mean a baskal like a typical baskal that we have as a voice from the heavens. Rather, Rashi says, Shamu kol tzo'ekes ploni meis v'lo ra'u adam b'tzamos. I will say, ultimately, again, baskal in this context means we hear a voice, but we don't get to identify the source of that voice. See, here's someone crying out, Reuven is dead, but I don't get to identify exactly who that is. You could allow a woman to remarry based on that voice. Well, again, we'll see in the Gemara. So I will say one time there was a guy standing on a mountaintop, and he said, Reuven, the son of Yaakov, from the city of Hebron, ultimately again died. So they went to find the person on top of the mountain. They couldn't find the person on top of the mountain, but based on the testimony, they allowed the wife to remarry. There was another story in the city of Tzalmon where a person said, Ani ish ploni ben ish ploni nashchani nachash. So I'll say an interesting case over here. So in Tzalmon, the guy says, I, Reuven, the son of Yaakov, nashchani nachash. I was bitten by a snake. V'hare ani meis, and I'm going to die as a result of the snake bite. V'holchu v'lo kiru. So here's what's happened. They heard him say this, but then they saw a body, they went to identify the body. V'lo kiru, but apparently because of the snake bite, ultimately, again, they couldn't recognize the body. I don't know, I guess maybe a snake bite causes swelling or bruising or something, but they couldn't identify the body anymore. But they nevertheless allowed his wife to remarry. Rabbi say, based on what? Based on the idea that there was a guy who gave eidos in the same area, saying that he suffered a snake bite. They allowed his wife to go out and get remarried. Rabbi say, first white line, Kuf Chav Beis Amud Aleph, Amar Bar Shmuel, Tana Beis Shammai Omrim, Ein Masina Pi Baskal, Ubeisor Masina Pi Baskal. I will say, Beis Shammai says, you don't allow a woman to get remarried based on a baskal. If you just hear someone saying something, but you can't identify who the person is, can't allow a woman to remarry based on that. Beis Hillel says, yes, you can. My kamashmal mas nisini. We'll say, I don't understand. Okay, we have a Mishnah, right? It's a Stam Mishnah. Stam Mishnah, right? Mishnah without attribution. We would say that reflects the view of Beis Hillel. So what are you coming to teach me? We'll say, it's to teach me that if you happen to find another Stam Mishnah that says that you cannot rely on a baskal, just know, number one, that it's Beis Shammai, and know, number two, that we don't paskin that way. So it says the Gemara, v'halchu v'lo matzu. So I will say, the Mishnah tells a story. So one time it happened that people heard a voice coming from top of the mountain saying, Reuven, the son of Yaakov from the city of Hebron, died. They went and they did not find the person. I says, the Gemara, maybe it wasn't a human being, right? Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was a person. I'm sorry. Maybe it was a shade, right? Maybe it was a shade. To which the Gemara says, Amarav Shera'u lo dimus Adam. No, they saw the image of a person, but Lamaisa, by the time they get to it, they just couldn't ascertain who it was. Inhu nami damu. So 1 second, shadim could also assume the form of people. To which the Gemara says, D'chazule bavua. No, because they saw that the person cast a shadow. Inhu nami isla bavua. Shadim also have a shadow. D'chazule bavua di bavua. So I will say again, they saw the shadow of a shadow. I will say again, depending on how the sun is situated, sometimes your shadow casts a shadow as well. So vidilma lidido islu bavua di bavua. Maybe the shade also has a shadow of a shadow. Amrali Yonasan Shida. So I'll say, who is this guy Yonasan Shida? So Rashi says two possibilities. Yonasan Shida could either be a shade, right? Yonasan the shade, right? He's a Hamish shade, right? So I'll say, so ultimately again, see either it's Yonasan the shade, or it's a guy Yonasan who was an expert in shading. Okay, either way, Yonas and Shida told me, Bavua Islay, everyone knows Shadim have a shadow, Bavua de Bavua Leslay, but they don't have a shadow of a shadow. So I will say, in that respect, here's what we know. We know, hey, guys, don't joke around about this stuff. The Chevra over there in the back, right? No joking around about Shadim. You don't want to mess with this. Right? So I'll say, so the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so the point there, I will say, so what do you see over here? You see over here that they knew for sure it was a person. You knew for sure it was a person. They didn't know who the person was. So as long as you know it's a human being, it's not a shade, we could rely on the baskol. To which the Gemara says, Vidilma Starahavi. So this is great, I will say. So there are no lengths that a co-wife will not go to in order to go ahead and make the life of her fellow co-wife miserable. Maybe it was that Sarah. Maybe that Sarah got up there on the mountaintop, yelled down to Reuven, the son of Yaakov from Hebron died, and she did this in order that her co-wife should think that she's free to get remarried. She'll get remarried, finally be out of the picture. Reuven's going to come home the next day after work. Hey, so maybe that's what happened over here. To which the Gemara says, sakana kosvin v'nostin afapi she'in makirin. So I will say this is actually quite fascinating. The Gemara says, now I will say it seems to be at first an unrelated fact, but look what the Gemara says. B'shas sakana, in a time of danger, we write and deliver a get even though we don't recognize the husband. And I will say, now what look at Rashi, what does this mean? B'shas sakana, right, almost right across in Rashi. B'shas sakana, she'adam esukan, if you have a situation where a person is in the throes of death, kigom mishay mushlach bebar, va'amar kol shomea kolo yikasev get liishto, kosev inosin, v'samchin olei b'chol duvar, she'omra anihu ploni ben ploni. So we'll listen to this. In the situation where he had a husband thrown into a pit and he's going to die, and he calls out from the bottom of the pit, I am Reuven, the son of Yaakov, from the city of Hebron. Write for my wife a get, here's her name, and give her the get. We listen. Abba say, even though this is far from ideal, because at the end of the day, normally we need to see the husband, have the husband present, but b'shas sakana, because again, there's a concern about sakana, he's going to die and his wife is going to be in aguna, we write the get. Rashi says, "V'hachanami kishas hasakana damya shimlo tami lozer lo timsa achar v'teshiv aguna." So I will say this case is also considered to be like a sakana. And I will say the Gemara is not suggesting that the case over here had some extenuating circumstances, but the case itself is an extenuating circumstance. Why? Because in any of these cases where the husband is dead and we don't have a body, the ability to prove his death and allow his wife to remarry is going to be very difficult. So in this case, I will say we see the theme. The theme is we accept all kinds of compromised eidos in order to prevent his wife from becoming an aguna. Just like the case of sakana, where we allow the get to be written even under less than optimal circumstances. Mishnah. I will say, listen to this. We actually saw this Mishnah before. Rabbi Akiva. One time I went to Narda to declare a leap year. Matzasi Nechemia ish beis deli. I ran into Nechemia ish beis deli. Amar li, Nechemia said to me, Shamati shemasin esa isha beretz Yisrael al pi eirechot. I heard, Nechemia said, Nechemia's in Bavel, in Arda, I heard that in Eretz Yisrael, they do not allow a woman to remarry based on the testimony of one witness. Except Ella, Yehuda ben Bava. Yehuda ben Bava is the only person who allows a woman to remarry based on the testimony of one witness. So Rabbi Akiva says, I nodded my head, I said to him, Kena Dvarim. Yeah, that's true. In Eretz Yisrael, we do not allow a woman to remarry based on the testimony of one witness. So Nechemia said to me, Amar Lahem, Rabbi Akiva, when you go back to Eretz Yisrael, Go into the base medrash and go in Emar Lahem Mishmi. Tell them in my name. Atem Yodim. You all know Shamadina Mishubeshes Begayasos. That Narda is overrun with gayasos, with robbers, thieves, marauding bands of troops. It was remembering we saw before. This is why Nehemiah is explaining that he himself didn't go to Eretz Yisrael to go ahead and give this testimony. So Rabbi Akiva, go back to Eretz Yisrael, give this over in my name. Mikublani mi Rabbi Gamliel Azakin, shemasina seisha pi edechad. So Nehemiah says, I have a Kabbalah from Rabbi Gamliel the elder that you are permitted to go ahead and allow a woman to remarry based on the testimony of one witness. Rabbi Akiva says, Kishabasi, Virtsasi Adran with Rabbi Gamliel, and ultimately Rabbi Akiva says, when I came back and reported this in front of Rabbi Gamliel, Samach lidvarai. He was so happy to hear this. Va'amar matzinu chaver Rabbi Huda ben Bava. And finally, in the base mention of Rabbi Sibel saying Eretz Yisrael, they always thought Rabbi Huda ben Bava was a das yochid. They thought that he was a solitary opinion, right? And therefore, again, they didn't really pay much attention. Now they hear Rabbi Gamliel Azakin holds this way as well. They were very happy. Mitoch hadavar niskar Rabbi Gamliel shenergu harugim betel arza. I will say once they were talking about this. Let's remember again, there's Rabbi Gamliel Azaken and his grandson Rabbi Gamliel. Ultimately, again, so after now this is the grandson. So as they were saying this, Rabbi Gamliel said, I remember one time there were Jews killed in Tel Arza. The Hesi Rabbi Gamliel Mishosein Pi Eid Echad, and Rabbi Gamliel allowed their wives to remarry based on the testimony of an Eid Echad. V'hochseku lios masian Eid mi Pi Eid. Eved mipi Isha. Let me read that again. So therefore, again, what happened over here, and this is fascinating. So you had a situation in history where in Bavel, they were accepting the testimony of an Eid Echad to allow a woman to remarry, and in Eretz Yisrael, not until this fateful encounter between Rabbi Akiva and Nehemiah Ish Beis Deli. Rabbi Akiva comes back, gives over testimony in the name of Rabbi Gamliel, and it appears that now in Eretz Yisrael, they also began to allow women to remarry based on the testimony of an Eid Echad. Now, listen to this. The Gemara says, "V'hochseku lios masian Eid mipi Eid." Furthermore, again, they expounded this, that you could even allow a woman to remarry Eid mipi Eid, which means what? So you have a witness who received testimony from another witness, right? Didn't even see the event himself. It's coming up, you can allow a woman to remarry that. Mipi Eved, or based on the testimony of an Eved. Mipi Isha, or we'll say Eved means Eved Kenani in this context. Mipi Isha, from a woman. Mipi Shivcha, a maidservant. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Omrim, Ein Masina Seisha Pi Eid Echad. So let's listen to this. Apparently there were still some holdouts. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you can't allow a woman to remarry based on the testimony of an Eid Echad. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Lo Pi Isha, V'lo Pi Eved, V'lo Pi Shivcha, V'lo Pi Krovim. Rabbi Akiva says, I'll accept an Eid Echad, but not every Eid Echad. Not every Eid Echad. You can't allow testimony of a woman, can't allow testimony of an Eved, a Shivcha, or relatives. Okay, so let's analyze. We'll say, Gemara, Sav Rabbi Akiva api ishalo, is actually Rabbi Akiva says that a woman can't testify about the death of a man to allow his wife to remarry. Vatanya, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Akiva, Isha ne'emenes lahavigita mikal v'chomer. Rabbi say, listen to this. A woman is believed to bring her own get from overseas to the Beis Din and to say b'fanei nechtav b'fanei nechtam, to go ahead and to testify about the lishma nature of the get. Mikal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Uman nashim shamru chacham ein ne'emanos lomar meis baila. If the women who are not believed to say the husband died, right? Ne'emanos lahavigitein, are still believed to go ahead and bring their get. Zushin ne'emanos lomar meis baila. Eino din shne'emanos lahavigita. But remember again, a woman herself is believed to show up in Beis Din, right? Or I should say, a woman herself is believed to show up in Beis Din to say, my husband died, right? If she's believed to say, my husband died and allow herself to remarry, she's certainly believed to what? Bring her get to Beis Din and ascertain, or I should say, to testify to the lishma nature of her get. To which the Gemara says, Nashim sha'amru chachamim hu deloka mehemni, isha ba'alma mehemna. To which the Gemara says, take a look at Rashi, Nashim sha'amru chamesh nashim. No. When we say that women are not believed, I will say that goes back to the Mishnah that spoke about the 5 women who are not believed to testify on Rachel's behalf, or to testify that Reuven died to allow Rachel to remarry. Why? Because those 5 women, what? Hate Rachel. Right? Those are the 5 contentious relationships. However, so the Gemara says, Isha ba'alma mehemna, solo kasha, Kan kodim she'echziku, kan la'achar she'echziku. Rabbi say, remember again, there's two iterations of this halacha. There's before Rabbi Akiva comes back with the testimony of Rabbi Gamliel, and there's after Rabbi Akiva comes back. Before Rabbi Akiva came back, Rabbi Akiva and the rest of the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael, with the exception of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, no one allowed a woman to remarry based on the testimony of an Eid Echad. After Rabbi Akiva comes back and gives over the testimony from Nehemiah in the name of Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken, then what? Everyone believed a woman, right, to go ahead and give testimony that a man died and allowed the man's wife to remarry. Incredible. Mishnah. Amrulo. So let's listen to this. Listen to this story. It was a story. The B'nai Levi, right? B'nai Levi, who went to Tzoar, Irat Tamar. They went to Tzoar, the city of date palms. So we'll say there was a group of guys who went to Tzoar. One of the Chevra became sick. So we'll call him Reuven. Reuven got sick. So what do? They checked Reuven into an inn, and they said, Reuven, you know what, stay here. We're going to continue on. We'll pick you up on the way back. And what happened? Right? They come back on the way back. They say to the innkeeper, where is our friend? No mislahem meis ukvartiv. So she says to them, unfortunately, he passed away, and I buried him. Ultimately, again, and they allowed his wife to remarry. In other words, Beis Din allowed his wife to remarry based on this episode. Says the Gemara, V'lo tehei kohenes kepundakis. So I will say, if halacha l'maisa, we're going to go ahead and trust a pundakis. Now, what's wrong with a pundakis? An innkeeper we'll discuss. But if you're going to trust a pundakis, that means any Jewish woman ultimately, again, should be believed to give testimony. To which the Gemara says, Amar lahu, when Jewish women are like this pundakis, then they'll be believed. They will say, we'll see in the Gemara exactly what's going on over here. So why? What happened to pundakis? Hapundakis utzo lahem maklo tarmilo v'sefer Torah shaya biyado. They will say they weren't just relying on the word of the pundakis. They will say, what happened? So when they come back and they say, where is our friend? What does the pundakis do? She brings out, right? Maklo, his staff, Tarmilo, his cloak, and a Sefer Torah. Right? He was trying to Sefer Torah. So what she did is she brought out the things that what do they call it? Personal effects. Right? They brought it as personal effects. That was obviously a simon. So both say, so this is not a case where they were just relying on her testimony. Right? She proved her point by going ahead and bringing out his personal effects. Well, say, I'll just tell you something amazing. How beautiful is this? Look, what were his personal effects? His cloak, his staff, and his Sefer Torah. Right? I will say, teaching us what? No matter where you travel in life, the one thing that has to always go with you is your Torah. You're traveling to an inn, you're traveling to Tzoar, Irat Tmarim, and I will say, by the way, isn't this the beauty of the Daf? Isn't this the beauty of the Daf? No matter where you go, I will say, sometimes it's the overwhelming nature of the Daf, right? That you know that no matter what is happening in life, there is a blot Gemara that is waiting, that has your name on it. And by the way, it's not going away, right? You could sleep in, you could sleep late, you could get busy, you could do this. That daf is there. And she's calling out to you, right? Learn me, right? It's not going away. We'll say Torah has to go with us wherever we go. And we'll say it's one of the incredible things. Even you travel to another city, right? Assuming that there's an infrastructure, what are you almost always going to find? A Daf Yomi shir, right? And we'll say Torah has to go with us wherever we go. You know, we spoke on Smichas Chaver about going to a place, vacationing in a place where there's not a minyan. Okay, so maybe that's a machlokes. One thing is, you can never vacation in a place where there's no Torah. Doesn't have to mean that there's a shir there, but your Torah has to go with you wherever you go in this world. Such an incredible yesod. Amud Beis. Let's say Amud Beis, Kuf Chof Beis, Amud Beis, Meseches Yevamos. Overwhelming. What a beautiful. So my guru said the Pundakis. I will say, so the Mishnah makes it sound like that the Pundakis, right? The Gemara says, the Mishnah is like, if you could believe the Pundakis, right, you could believe any Jewish woman. What's so bad about the Pundakis? So Amrav Kahana, Pundakis Avedes Kochavim Haisa. Oh, okay. It was a non-Jewish Pundakis. But say this wasn't a Jewish woman, right? This was a Gentile. Now we'll say we've already established halacha l'maisa. We'll say when is a guy believed, right? When is an akum believed? When Umasiach lefi tuma haisa. Now again, I will say a guy is believed when a guy offers up information of his or own volition. So in this case over here, I will say what happens. The pundakis sees the chevra walking back. What happens? And she says, Ze maklo v'ze tarmilo v'ze kever shekvartiv bo. So I will say in this version, she comes out and she says, this is his staff, this is his cloak, and this is the kever, the grave I buried him in. She wasn't Avedes Kochavim, umasicha lafi tuma haisa. And ultimately, again, she was just talking of her own volition, and she said, Ze maklo, v'ze tarmilo, v'ze kever shekvartiv bo. And I will say, by the way, so therefore I will say, look, so let's stop here for just a moment. So remember again, there's a couple of interesting things about this story. So remember again, when we first read this story, so we think that what's the point of the story? I will say, what's the point of the story? What's the point? Besides being a great story, right? What's a good story? That you could believe a woman. And I will say, when reading the story, we're assuming, don't clip that, right? Don't clip that. I don't want to see that out anywhere, right? I don't say so again, it's going to become a meme, right? In time for this, right? So again, remember, just follow the flow of the Mishnayos, right? Follow the flow of the Mishnayos, right? So we'll say, what did we establish in the last Mishnah? In the last Mishnah, we had an incredible halachic pivot, which is in Eretz Yisrael, they were not believing the testimony of a woman to allow Rachel, the wife of Ruvain, to remarry. Then Rabbi Akiva comes back from Narda, gives over the testimony of Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken in the name of Nechemia Ish Beis Deli, and suddenly, something new occurred. Now, halacha l'maisa again, we're allowing, if a woman shows up in Beis Din and says that Ruvain died, we're believing her. So we'll say, when you read this Mishnah, it sounds like the Mishnah is bringing a Maisa Shahaya to go ahead and what? To back up the ruling of the previous Mishnah, that the Pundakis comes out and says, your friend Ruvain, who you left there, he was sick, now he died. So we'll say, but then the problem just is, the Mishnah makes it sound like, if you could believe a Pundakis, you could believe anyone. I don't understand. A Jewish woman is a Jewish woman is a Jewish woman, right? What does it matter if she's a Pundakis, she's a Kohenet, she's a Levia? What does it make a difference, right? So now they want to no. That's the case. So we'll say, this is not a case of a Jewish woman. This is a case of an akum. Yes, we've established in the previous Mishnah that you could believe a Jewish woman when she gives testimony. That we've established. Rabosai, this is going back now to the ability of an akum to give eidos. The akum is giving eidos over Rabosai, and the pundakis is coming out. She is masiach lefi tuma. She's giving information of her own volition, and she's saying Ruvain died. Rabosai, by the way, I'll point out over here, if you notice in this version, what's missing from her eidos? Sefer Torah. Because I will say, the reality is that although everyone is supposed to take their Torah wherever they go, not everyone takes their Torah wherever they go. An incredible Yisrael, I will say, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be the kind of person that no matter where I go, my Gemara is always tucked under my arm? No matter where I go, my Sefer Torah is always with me? Or am I the kind of person, Chas Shalom, people describe me, I always bring my cloak, right? I always bring my staff. By the way, I will say there's an alternate version of this Gemara where she comes out and she says, she brings the guys, right? It's Maklo, Tarmilo, and Kiso, his wallet. Both saying, so am I the kind of guy who always takes my cloak, my wallet, my staff, but I don't bring my Torah? Or no, I bring all of those things and I never leave. I never leave without my Gemara. I never leave without my Torah. Both say that's the choice we have to make in life about the kind of people we truly want to be. So both say, so says the Gemara, but 1 second, this isn't Masiach Lefi Tumo. After all, again, to which the Gemara says, Vaha aye chaverinu ka'amarla. Now both say, this isn't Masiach Lefi Tumo. Why? What are they saying to her? They're asking her, where's Ruvain? So we'll say, this isn't offering information of her own volition. She's being asked the question. So we'll say, listen to this. No, what was the story? Kevan dechazesinu bachya amrula. So we'll say, bachya. When she saw the chevra approaching, she started crying. Amrullah, they said to her, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Where's Ruvain? Amrulahem meisu kvartis. We'll say, it's interesting. So they see, in the story, they see her tears. The fact that she has this emotional response, seeing the chevra coming as Masiach Lefi Tuma. That was the eidos itself, ultimately, again, that he was dead. Pretty incredible. Rabbi says, listen to this. Tan Rabbanon. Ma'aseh ba'adam echad shebala ha'id ala isha. Lifnei Rabbi Tarfon. There was an interesting story here. There was a guy who came to testify al ha'isha. Now, Rabbi say, when it says al ha'isha, what he's coming to testify, this is a Jew who's coming to testify about Rachel, namely that what? That Reuven died. So a Jew is showing up in Beis Din, Reuven died. So what happened? Amr lo. So Rabbi Tarfon says, Timbini, my son, how do you know that Reuven is dead? How do you know about Rachel's husband? Amar anivahu, I'll say first wide line, anivahu hayinu holchi baderech. We were walking together on the road. And what happened? V'radav acharenu gayis. And I will say we were chased by a group of robbers. I'll say this is incredible. V'nitla b'yichor shel zayis upashchu v'hechser sagayis. So I'll say what happened? And this guy, so remember again, we'll call him, actually, let me change this around a little bit. Reuven shows up in Beis Din. He's the aide, just to keep this easier, because we're going to see this guy's going to have a name. Right? Reuven shows up in Beis Din, and what happens? He says, Rachel, the wife of Ploni, is permitted to get remarried because I saw her husband die. Rabbi Tarfon says, tell me the story. So Reuven says, I was traveling with this guy, and we were attacked. And this guy, we'll name him in just a moment, this guy, he broke off a branch of an olive tree and he fought off an entire group of robbers with the branch of the olive tree. Amarti, I will say, by the way, that's a Jew, right? That's a Jew, right? I will say, Jews have to learn to defend themselves as well, right? And Jews have to be able to fight back as well. It's an incredible, sometimes in the gullus mentality of things, that we think that our role is always the victim. Our role is not always the victim, right? The strong Jew, the valiant Jew. The world doesn't like the strong Jew or the valiant Jew, but Lamaisa, that's what the Jew needs to be. So Reuven says this guy tore off a branch of an olive tree and he fought back this whole group. Amartilo, Aryeh, Yashakochacha. I said to the guy Aryeh. Now I will say, Reuven says, I call the guy Aryeh. Why? Because Lamaisa, what does Aryeh mean? Lion. I said, lion, shkoyach. Amarli. How did you know? My name is Aryeh. Kach korid osi be'iri. This is what they call me in my city. Yochanan beRebbi Yona's son, Aryeh de Michfar Shichyeh. They call me in my city Yochanan, the son of Rabbi Yona's son, the lion of the village of Shichyeh. Okay. That was his name, the Yamim Chala Umei. So we'll say, so now Reuven says, I'm traveling with this guy, we'll call him Aryeh, right? That was more his descriptive name. I'll just point out something fascinating. We don't have time to get into it now, but I'll just point out to you something really interesting, which is that there's an interesting machlokes in halacha about whether or not it's appropriate to give multiple names. When you're naming a child, should a child only be given one name or multiple names? I'll point out to her something very interesting, that some use this Gemara as a raya, that one could even give a child multiple names, even naming after multiple people. Because Rabbi said this is an interesting case where you have this guy having multiple names, Yochanan, and also given the additional name, more descriptive name of Aryeh as well. All right, in any event, so what happens? So the Yamam Chala, now Reuven says, I stayed with Aryeh a little bit longer. Aryeh got sick, and ultimately, again, he died. The Hesi Rabbi Tarfon es Ishto. And ultimately, again, Rabbi Tarfon allowed his wife to remarry. So the Gemara said, Rabbi Tarfon lo bay Jusha v'chakira. Did Rabbi Tarfon not require Jusha v'chakira? I will say some type of cross-examination. Vatanya, Maisa ba'adim sheba lifnei Rabbi Tarfon, lahoyd eidos isha. One time, a guy came up for Rabbi Tarfon, ultimately, again, to go ahead and give eidos. Isha. Amar lo b'ni, eich ata yodea eidos zu. So Rabbi Tarfon said, my son, how do you know this eidos? Amar lo ani v'hu hayu holchen baderech. So Rabbi Tarfon says, one time I was walking with this guy, right? In other words, so this guy shows up, testify that Reuven is dead. So Rabbi Tarfon says, no, how do you know the eidos? So the guy says, I was walking with this guy. We were chased by a group of thieves. He ripped off a fig branch. Right? And ultimately, again, he went ahead and he chased the group away. He chased the robbers away. Martilo, I said to him, Shkoyach Aryeh. Amarli Yafek Kivanti Lishmi. That's my name. Shekach Korin Osa Be'iri, Yochanan ben Yona's son, Aryeh de Michfar Shichyeh. So the Yom Chala, the guy got sick, this guy Aryeh got sick, Umeis, and he died. Amar lo kach amarti li Yochanan ben Yonasan lemichvar shichya Aryeh. So Rabbi Tarfon says back to the guy, to the aide. I just want to go over the aides. You told me his name was Yochanan ben Yonasan of Kfar Shichya, right? Aryeh. So Rabbi said, what did he do? He reversed the Aryeh with the name of the city. He was trying to mix him up. Amar lo elakach amarti lecha Yochanan ben Yonasan Aryeh to Bechvar Shichya. The diktek alav shnayim ushlosha pamim. The kiven es dvarav. So Rabbi Tarfon went back and forth him a couple of times until finally he was able to ascertain what he indeed said. The hisid Rabbi Tarfon es ishto. And based on this, Rabbi Tarfon ultimately again allowed his wife to remarry. So I will say, you see from here that there's an interesting machlokes. Do you require some type of drisha v'chakira, cross-examination of the witnesses when giving it? So we'll say we're going to stop over here for today. We're going to Mirz Hashem finish this final piece of the Gemara tonight at the Siyum. Mirz Hashem b'sha'a tova u'mazach. So we'll say, bring your Gemaras to the Siyum, because as we just learned, a Yid never goes anywhere without his Gemara, even to the Siyum. So we'll say, again, so we'll make our Mazel Tovs tonight. We'll say, we haven't finished yet, but what an awesome and overwhelming accomplishment. Yevamos, tomorrow morning, Ksuvis, Daf, Beis, Hamadaf. We'll say, looking forward to celebrating tonight with everyone at the Siyum. B'sha'a tova u'mitzlachas. Shkoyach. Thank you, Sevi. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. All right, Chavra, have a wonderful day, everyone. Moshe, great to see you. Bennett, great to see you.